Hello listeners, and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, bringing you energy matters in an informal setting. In today's pod, we return to Norway and the investment climate for new renewables in the country. We've come a long way from the skyrocketing wholesale prices of a few years ago, and now the market has sunk to a level that raises questions about the viability of future green investments in the wider Nordic region. Helping me, Richard Sverrisson, to discuss this and much, much more is our old friend Marius Holm Rennesund of Thema. A warm welcome to you, Marius.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Must be busy days.
It is. It's a lot of happening in the market right now, so it's definitely busy.
Absolutely. And on the policy and regulation side as well?
Yeah, a lot of happening all across Europe, and I think also in the wider picture and new geopolitical situation that also feeds into the European energy and power markets. So it's going to be exciting also following that forward.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all become very global in a way, hasn't it?
It has, but it's also, I mean, we have had years of kind of rule-based trading now, and now everything has been shaking up. So far, it has led Europe closer together. But we will see. We had the elections, the European elections last week, with a lot of votes for the very right wing. So we'll see what that leads to in terms of the European Union moving forward.
Absolutely. I mean, fingers crossed it doesn't lead to a slowdown of the energy transition here. But of course, that's the concern here.
Yeah, it definitely is. And we're seeing also, I mean, a market in renewables where China have large market shares in parts of the solar and batteries, etc., and the EU wanting to move away from that due to security concerns, and that might also increase the cost in the energy transition.
Yeah, but is that I think that's something that the EU wants to do, but hasn't that ship sailed in a sense? Is it too late for Europe to build up that kind of solar capacity or to manufacture solar panels and also EV batteries?
Yeah, I mean, you at least need a political will there and maybe some kind of support. But I think all the governments across Europe see this as very important now, security issues in general. So I think we're moving in that direction. Maybe we're a little bit too late. So that's but it's difficult to see not that costs are increased if we are actually following that path. As the last few months have been basically flooded by cheap solar panels from China, etc. But it's still early days in that discussion, so that's something to follow for sure. And I think also kind of the security margins in the power system across Europe will need to increase, and that's costly as well.
And it's almost sort of I think it's a well-known fact, but hardly discussed that the production of the solar panels in China were produced mainly through coal-fired electricity generation.
Exactly.
So they're quite dirty in a sense.
They are.
So maybe it's a good thing that can be moved to Europe, and also if it generates jobs and energy security, which is obviously a prime concern for the European Commission and European politicians generally. But if we turn to Norway and the Nordic region, Marius, what is there also this kind of backlash against the net zero or the climate policies that have been at the forefront, really, of policy for 5-10 years and beyond?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a backlash, but we definitely see public opinion, and we've seen that in Norway for years with onshore wind kind of turning. It has been difficult to invest in onshore wind in Norway. We see in Sweden more and more projects being vetoed. Although I think still it's public opinion-wise in Sweden, the public really sees that we need more renewables. It's a more difficult situation in Norway. Finland, on the other hand, we saw a lot of investments a couple of years back and basically turning Finland from a high-priced area that combined with Olkiluoto 3 finally coming online to a lower-priced area. But it's more difficult. I mean, we've also seen costs for wind increasing, partly due to the war and supply problems. So you've had a market where prices have been going down and costs are stayed high and even increasing. So right now, I think it's difficult. I think we will see costs coming down. They've already have for solar due to the overcapacity in China. I think we will eventually see that in wind as well. We see the first signs of that with costs coming down further down the value chain, but it takes time to trickle up to lower turbine prices, basically. So I think that's a challenge, and of course we see low prices in the Nordics right now. So it's a more difficult case.
I mean, that's maybe a good point for me to. I think some of the points you've raised here, Marius, we'll discuss over the course of this episode. But if we start off with the wholesale power price levels in Norway and the Nordic region, as I mentioned in the introduction, it's they're a lot lower than what we saw at the height of when the war in Ukraine, when Russia invaded Ukraine, and also in the build-up to the war, of course.
Yeah.
What are the main reasons for that? If you can explain that to our listeners, what's happening in the markets at the moment?
Yeah, I mean the very high prices we saw during 2022, 23 partly as well, is really due to high gas prices and combined with relatively high CO2 prices as well. And then Europe have been quite good at substituting away from Russian gas. Germany has built up more LNG facilities, followed up with some long-term contracts, but we're also reliant on more spot cargoes coming in. But gas prices are basically back to pre-crisis levels. For a while, they were even lower, have come up over the last few months. And we've also seen CO2 prices going down, and that's determining the production cost of a gas-fired power plants, which sets the price on the continent for many hours, and that also feeds into the Nordic market. But we have a very divided Nordic market with a southern part which is well connected to the continent and follow prices there, although with a discount quite closely, and then we have a northern part where we have in a normal year a large surplus that you can't export southwards. And that's also influenced the system price and the total Nordic price. So we see a quite large price spread also towards Germany. Very high right now. We think it will close in the coming years, but it will definitely be a spread there. While if you look at southern Norway and the NO2 area, we think over time, with a lot of new demand-side projects likely to come in, the queue at the TSO is very long. You have projects with the possibility to double demand. That won't happen. Not all of them will be realized. And it's really the grid that now is setting the limitations in Norway for the prospects of new demand going forward. But with the demand picking up, very little investments over the coming years in new production capacity. We are looking at the balanced situation and maybe also a deficit towards 2030.
That close, yeah, you think?
Yeah. And then, we need imports and prices needs to go above prices in the countries we're importing from, meaning that we will, at least southern part of the Nordics and particularly Norway, will go closer to the German price and eventually potentially also above for a period.
But that's some way off at the moment, and we're still only in 2024, so that's 6 to 10 years away potentially. Yeah. But so if I can turn to the points you raised there about demand and the increase that you're seeing, or the queues for new projects at the TSO. Can you give us some more detail about that? What kind of projects are they, and what kind of demand growth can you see?
Well, it's a combination of projects. I mean, we see battery factories, we see data centers, obviously, in the queue. We see also more electrification of existing industries and transport as well. So it's all the buzzwords with the batteries and the data centers, etc. And some hydrogen projects, fewer in Norway than we see elsewhere in the Nordics. Fossil fuel steel is really driving that demand in northern Sweden. But some projects are there. But when we get new players coming here now, and the last time they looked at the Nordic market in Norway was 5 years ago, and they say this was a no-brainer. Grid was not an issue, relatively low power prices, high security of supply, more than enough power. And now they come back and suddenly realize if I'm not in the queue at the TSO, I can forget my project for the next 10 years. And then they rather move to Sweden or Finland. So, but that long queue also make us quite comfortable in believing that we will get a quite steep demand growth over the coming years. There might be delays. Power prices go up. Some of those projects might not be realized, but there's more than enough new projects to come in as well.
But you mentioned, Marius, data centers, and one of the sort of hot topics at the moment is AI and the amount of power that uses. Are you seeing any of those kind of projects in the queue or being talked about at least?
Yeah, they're definitely being talked about, and I think the discussion that is really coming up in Norway now is should we give power to Tik-Tok or others, or should we prioritize what we will use the electricity on? I mean, we've been in a situation since the market was liberalized that we have had plenty of electricity, and it's a first come first served basis for getting grid connections. Now, when we're looking at potential scarcity, those discussions are kind of coming in. Should we prioritize certain types of industries that creates more jobs, or should we keep the first come, first served? And I think, as I said, it seems like data centers, at least the ones that are not in the queue now, they would rather go to Sweden or Finland because it's grid is not an issue, and it's easier to establish there right now.
Absolutely. I mean, it just reminds me that a couple of months ago there was a big chaotic episode of the trains were cancelled going to the airport, and I shared a taxi with someone who was building a data center in Norway and was very excited by the projects in the Nordic region generally. So that's obviously something that's a growth area. The other thing, Marius, I mean, so it's interesting that there is more of people are urging people, the TSO or the people deciding to be more picky, to pick and choose between the projects. And I mean, that's quite a complex area. I mean, you're getting quite. It can be very subjective, can it not?
Yeah, definitely, and I think it's still a way to go. But I think the discussion will be there, and you basically ask the government to pick the winners in a way, both the projects that will proceed and the projects that actually give what you want. Maybe that is those that are a bit more labor intensive as well, so you get jobs. Sometimes it might be easier. You set up a hospital versus a data center, right? But yes, it's very subjective. The TSO in Norway now has said that if projects don't show any progress, they will cut them off earlier. But again, what is enough progress, right? There's a lot of decisions to being taken out there without kind of firm basis for that decisions. So it's I think we'll see a heated debate around this.
And to be fair, I mean, governments generally, not just Norway or the Nordics, but generally don't have a great record in picking winners, do they?
No, exactly. So it's going to be a challenge.
Absolutely. But let's talk more generally about, so on the supply side, we talked a little bit on demand. I mean, what's happening on the supply side? You said that the investment climate now is very challenging in a way. What are the main reasons for that?
No, I mean, we've had a full stop basically in onshore wind for years. All the licenses were drawn back. You had to reapply. And it's now gradually opening up if the municipality is positive. And we see already now that a lot of municipalities actually veto onshore wind in general without seeing even a project. So you got fewer and fewer sites to pick from. I think to succeed, you have to have somebody local that is connected to the area, to the municipalities, and that you do it in a good way. So there are fewer that are actually able to do that, and the public opinion against onshore wind is still quite negative. So we see some projects proceeding. We see different ways of trying to maneuver to make them more to make the local people more pro them. We have some companies offering power at cost, basically, for new wind farms to the inhabitants in the municipality, etc. So you try different ways of persuading municipalities to actually be the host of the project.
It's much more a carrot than the stick, isn't it? Yeah,
it is, yeah. But we've also seen, the tax system being changed so that more should go back to the municipalities. But onshore wind is still challenging, and I think it will be going forward. We see some solar coming, both on the household side, but also more industrial projects. I think also there we're going to see a new debate. It's often farmland that's being used. So that creates a debate around what you should use the areas for, which is particular for solar utility scale. I think we will see projects, but also they're heavily debated. So if you look at kind of the long term, it's really the offshore wind that should save us in a way. We've seen costs going up there as well, but we got the winner for the first auction.
Did that surprise you, Marius? Or
yeah, it surprised me a bit. I think it was a foreign winner. That was in a way a good thing, because you always get this debate of whether Statkraft or Equinor was told to bid. So we're out of that.
For those listeners who are unaware, can you just say who won the auction and under what terms?
Well, it was a consortium of a Swedish and a Dutch and Japanese fund and company and investment fund owned by IKEA, which has a track record in offshore wind. But basically, they will use up the subsidies over the first 5 to 10 years of the lifetime of the plant. Of course, it also remains to be seen that it will be built. It's possible to draw out. It's a fine for that. But it's really the offshore wind that will bring us back into balance in the 30s. So we really need that in the long term. I think from what we see for the coming years, demand is definitely growing, and there's not much supply coming online. So we will eventually kind of eat away from that power surplus that we have.
So the offshore wind is certainly very important there. And as you say, it's quite interesting that, I think it's quite telling, in fact, that a foreign bidder won, because in other parts of Europe, it's not always the case, and that sort of potentially emphasizes the fact that it was a very competitive auction and a competitive process, which is positive. Now, when it comes to, it's interesting also what you say about solar and wind. We had the solar debate in other countries. So Italy, for example, has banned or is wanting to ban the use of solar on agricultural land because of that conflict over land use. And then, you see, we talked earlier this year, I talked with the head of Renewable Norway, Oslo Cargo, about this kind of getting municipalities on board and buying them into getting, if you want to build the new onshore, it's onshore wind, it's very tricky, it's very complex, and it's hard to get that buy-in, isn't it, from the population at large?
It is, and therefore, I also think we will see a change in who is actually investing in onshore wind. What we saw previously was a lot of foreign pension funds, renewables funds, etc. We might see some of them, but they need to cooperate with somebody local, a local utility. So I will think that we will definitely see more utilities, Norwegian utilities investing in wind, and less of the foreign money coming in.
So quite the flip side of what happened on the offshore side.
Yeah.
But what about new hydro? Is that just off the table? Is that completely impossible, Marius?
No, I mean we are seeing investments. Sorry, but most of them are basically upgrades and increasing the capacity because we are going into a market with more volatility going forward. And as a hydropower producer, you want to catch those high price hours. So it's less of new production and more of new capacity. We see a few larger projects that can come online, and then the resource base is not that big anymore, right? There's a lot of protected rivers, so we don't expect the large investments. We'll see some more small scale. We will see some upgrades that also would give some additional production and maybe a few medium-sized to larger projects. But it's really wind offshore, some wind onshore, and a bit of solar going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in terms of solar as well, I mean, and I get this question a lot. Why do you see so much cannibalization of solar in the southern part of Norway? You don't have any solar, but we are really seeing that we are importing those low-priced hours from Germany when you have had an explosion in solar investments over the last couple of years.
And not the Netherlands as well has been
exactly.
There's the same kind of issues there of oversupply and grid constraints, and they're exporting their problems out to their neighbours.
Yeah.
If I can just touch on the topic of power purchase agreements or PPAs, the climate now with lower prices, is that quite challenging? What are you hearing at the moment in the Nordic region, Norway and the Nordic region, companies wanting to sign? Obviously, there's always a disparity between those who want to buy cheaply and to sell highly, but at higher rates. But what's happening at the moment given the environment of low prices?
No, I think it depends a bit on the area you're located in. We have large area price differences and large discrepancies between supply and demand in the different areas, right? And in the northern part of the countries, we see a large surplus now. We see companies with new projects wanting to do PPAs, but we also see, I think, suppliers that see that demand is going to grow in those areas and the projects won't be realized before, in a few years. So that has increased prices to some degree. On the other hand, of course, you're very influenced by the current market prices as well in those negotiations, and that has pushed prices in the other direction in parts of the Nordics. So I guess we see a bit fewer of the deals being made now.
So there's a bit of a slowdown.
Bit of a slowdown, but when we had the peak in wind power investments with a lot of foreign investors coming in, and they had to do a PPA because it was project financed. Those times are over. Investments have slowed down, and that also leads to less supply of PPAs. On the other hand, we see that more of the medium-sized companies kind of got the wake-up call during the energy crisis and have gotten more active in thinking about how to buy power, how to secure their power price. They're not, the big energy-intensive ones, but the ones that still have a fairly large energy consumption. And we see more of those players coming into the market as well.
That's interesting because if you aggregate their demand, that's still quite sizable, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's interesting because I think But in addition, Norway hasn't been as affected by negative prices as maybe Sweden and Finland. Well, definitely hasn't to the same extent. Are you seeing any kind of interest or from batteries or from storage, even hydrogen coming in to you mentioned the volatility for hydro producers, but it's also very interesting for those who have those kind of flexible assets in terms of batteries and otherwise and storage facilities? Yeah,
I will definitely see that. I think we see that more in Sweden than in Norway. It's a large pipeline of batteries there, and we've seen it in Germany for the last year or two. But we definitely see increased volatility, and everybody has talked about that for years. But over the last, couple of years, we really see it's happening. We see more volatility in the day-ahead market. We also see increasing prices in intraday and balancing markets as well. And when we look at Germany, I mean, we see a lot of batteries also being used in the intraday market. And basically what you want to achieve is not using your battery, but buying and selling in the same hour and lock in a profit there without getting the battery degradation. We still have a lot of flexibility, particularly in Norway. So the business case is worse there. And we see them rather in the more short-term markets than the day-ahead markets. But we will get investments. We see them in Sweden, some also in Norway. But the income potential is larger in Sweden, definitely.
Absolutely. That's very interesting. And I think another aspect which I want to touch on with you, Marius, is that's been very much in the media or focus here talked about in Norway, and that's nuclear power. It's Norway is one of the countries that they have some test reactors, have had them for many years, but you haven't actually had them actively producing power. What's the nature of the debate at the moment? Why has this kind of raised its head in Norway, the debate about bringing nuclear into the power mix?
No, I think it's partly because we don't want onshore wind. Offshore wind, yes, we want it, but we see it's expensive. And then suddenly this new technology with small reactors come in and say they can produce cheaply and use only a small area. I think the nature part of the debate going from climate now also being more pro-conserving nature has sparked that debate. Of course, we've also had one company that has been very, very vocal in the debate. I think it started off as something that could kind of say what's towards 2030 and the deficit we see that we might come into. That won't happen. Nobody ever built one of those small reactors. In Norway, we don't have any commercial reactors, have never had. There's not a licensing procedure and regulation in place. That will take a lot of time. We see now that the average time for a larger hydropower project to be realized is 12 years. Most of that is on the regulatory side with licensing. In a new sector where we don't have the framework at all, I think we'll see time increasing much from that as well. Optimistically, we could see that in the mid-40s or something. And then we haven't talked about cost yet.
Exactly.
And who knows? I mean, we never built any of them. The first kind of generation of those reactors will be more expensive than the next, etc. So, if somebody wants to build them on commercial terms, we might see them late in the 40s. But that's not something we kind of use in our base case when we do our long-term forecasts.
That's interesting because it's been talked about, but often the track record of these big reactors, they're not in terms of cost overruns and delays. I mean, it's the Finnish and the French examples. There are others, but those are clear.
Definitely, and that's one of the arguments of those wanting to build the smaller ones. That that's a very different technology, both security-wise, but also in manufacturing. And that cost overruns are less likely as it's not kind of tailor-made for each and one project. But that's, it still remains to be seen.
And how would that work? And just a final question, really, Marius. But how would that work in terms of a small modular reactor, or SMRs? They're often talked about. How would that work with a very renewable-based power system? I mean, we've seen it in Finland. We have a lot of negative prices, a lot of volatility after Olkiluoto 3 came online. Well, how would it work in Norway with very much a hydro-based system?
No, I think, well, first of all, Olkiluoto is really big. I mean, it's
Yeah.
1,600 megawatts, right? And here we are talking about modules of 200 to 400 megawatts, and they won't be built at the same time. So volumes will be less, and they will more work as baseload power, of course, adding to the baseload part of it, and you can still flex with the hydropower. So I think you won't see the effects you've seen in Finland, simply because you will do this gradually with smaller modules, and also gain some. And I think also that's what the developer wants: gain some experience from the first, and potentially build more.
Fascinating stuff. Marius, thank you very much for being a guest on the Montel Weekly podcast.
Thank you.